Good morning. My name is Vicki Heck. I'm a librarian for King County Library System. I work at our Newcastle, Mercer Island, and Newport Way, which is in South Bellevue. I work at those three branches for King County. Welcome today. We are partnering with Washington Poison Center, and they're going to give us a presentation on lead poisoning prevention. Thank you so much. We have got Alex and Megan here today from Washington Poison Center presenting. And so just a quick blurb before we get underway, I wanted to let you know King County Library System, even though our buildings are closed, we are busy behind the scenes. Our staff are working from home, and we have got plenty of online activities for kids and teens and adults. So check out kcls.org at our events online page, and you'll see everything that we have coming up. We also have a ton of resources. We always did downloadable resources. We've got ebooks, audiobooks. We've got some fantastic databases for learning languages. We have got streaming movies, streaming music. If you want to, during this downtime, if you want to punch up your career skills, we've got access to the lynda.com database where you can learn all kinds of different software skills. So many things available at kcls.org. I hope you check us out soon. But thank you for attending today's webinar with Washington Poison Center. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Megan and Alex. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Vicki. So welcome, everyone. We're really excited to give this presentation to you all today. It's a fun one for us. We typically at the Washington Poison Center present a lot on more of what you would think of traditionally as poisons, like household chemicals, especially right now during COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a different topic for us to dive into today, but it's still very much poisoning. So this is Alex and I. We will be your presenters today. Thought it'd be nice for you to see some pictures of us so you could at least pretend like we're all in the same room together. Before we get started and go through some housekeeping, Alex and I would love to know, where are you tuning in from? If you type into the chat box on the right-hand side of your GoToMeeting app, just tell us, what city are you tuning in from? So some quick housekeeping today. So we're going to keep everyone muted, but you can ask any questions that you have in the chat box, and Alex and I will lay eyes on that chat box and any questions pretty often throughout the presentation. So otherwise, just stay muted, and then Vicki, following the end of this presentation, she'll send out the recording and the slides so you all can review them if you need to look through information again. So today we're going to start with just an overview of the Washington Poison Center, and then we are going to dive into lead. We will talk about some of the effects that lead has on the human body, some of the common sources of lead exposure and ways to prevent lead exposure, and then look at a little bit of data and go into some resources in our area. So we will start with the Washington Poison Center. So the Washington Poison Center has been around for over 60 years. So we used to be a bunch of different poison centers in the state, but then we all merged together into one, and we serve the entire state of Washington. So as a poison center, we obviously deal, just as our name implies, with anything that might be poisonous. So we take a very broad definition of a poison. It's anything that is harmful if it's used the wrong way, in the wrong amount, or by the wrong person. So obviously that can apply to a lot of different things. We help folks with anything from plants and flowers to medications to fumes, vapors, chemicals, snake bites, insect bites and stings, household products, really anything that can be harmful we've heard about and we talk to folks about. The Poison Center offers two primary services. So there is public health education, which is what Alex and I do and what we're here today for all of you for. And then there is our Poison Center telephone helpline. and that is this phone number. This is really the bread and butter of the Poison Center. You can call this national toll-free number, and if you have a Washington area code, you will be directed to us at the Washington Poison Center, and you'll talk to one of our staff members about anything that you might have been exposed to that could be poisonous, or any questions that you might have about a potential poison. Our telephone helpline is always free. We are open 24/7 every day of the year, even now during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our hours have not changed. We are still here. HIPAA laws apply to us as well, so anything you call about is confidential. And we have interpretation services in over 260 languages for folks who may not be as comfortable speaking English. When you call the Poison Helpline, you will talk to one of our expert staff members who are specialists in poison information, or SPIES. It's a pretty fun acronym. SPIES are all nurses, pharmacists, or poison information providers that have gone through extensive training in poisons and toxicology. If they ever need any additional assistance, we also have on-call board-certified medical toxicologists that are always available to help. There are only 7 board-certified toxicologists in the state of Washington, and all of them work for us at the Poison Center. We'll go through a little bit of our data from last year, just to show you the volume of poisonings that we respond to. So in 2019, our SPIES managed over 125,000 calls regarding more than 66,000 cases. So you'll see that the number of calls is greater than the number of cases, and that just shows that we always follow up, or most of the time we're going to follow up. We like to make sure that folks are okay, so we will usually give people a call back just to check in. Calls to the Poison Center, unsurprisingly, a lot of them are about kids younger than 6. We all know kids love to explore the world with their mouths. They get into essentially everything. So it's very unsurprising that so many of our calls are about little kiddos. But we are not just for kids. We do receive a lot of calls about teens, adults, and older adults. And these calls actually tend to be more serious than the ones that we see in kids. So adults might call us about medication errors. They might be exposed to a chemical or cleaning product. There are lots of different exposure types we see in adults. People call us from home, from their workplace or school. Really, a lot of our calls are from home, but we also get calls from people who might be in transit to a healthcare facility. So medics and EMTs might call us. And then we also get quite a few calls from emergency departments and healthcare providers at different facilities who need consultation on some of their more complex toxicology cases. If you have any questions about the Poison Center, please feel free to type them in the chat box. Otherwise, we will move on to lead. So lead, first and foremost, is a naturally occurring metal. It comes from the earth. It's not a man-made product, but it is used in many different products. Historically, it was used in a lot more, but it's decreased a lot in the products you would find lead in as folks have realized the potential harms of it. So even though lead is found in our environment and is natural, it has no known purpose inside of our bodies. And so when it gets into the body can confuse it with some of the other essential nutrients we need, like calcium and vitamin D. And so this confusion can cause or can affect pretty much every organ and every system in your body. And these effects can be very long lasting. So when someone has negative effects from lead exposure, that's what we call lead poisoning. So this is the CDC's official definition of it. It's when a person's health or body functions are negatively affected by lead contamination in what they eat, drink, touch, or breathe. The good news, though, about lead and what we want you to keep in mind throughout this entire presentation is that lead poisoning is preventable. So anyone is at risk of lead poisoning, but some people are more susceptible than others, such as kids. Kids are very susceptible to lead, especially when they are 6 years and younger. And there are a lot of different reasons why they're more susceptible, so we'll go through them on the slide. One of the main reasons, though, is that kids are growing a lot. They are growing bones, they're developing stronger muscles, they're creating a lot of connections in their brain. So when lead, instead of those essential nutrients that help in all of these processes, when lead is available instead of those, then there can be some permanent and serious health effects. So children, we can go through the rest of the bullets on this slide, but that's like the main point, that they are rapidly growing and developing. But also they are breathing faster, which can make them inhale lead more and have higher exposure to lead. Proportional to adults, they also drink more liquids. So we have this little stat here that an average newborn drinks over half of a liter per day, which would be, in an adult, that would be the equivalent of drinking 35 cans of soda or over 3 gallons of a liquid per day. So little kids are drinking a lot more fluids, and if there's lead in that fluid, then they are ingesting higher amount proportionally. Kids also have more surface area of skin relative to their weight. So if they are being exposed to lead through their skin, then that can also mean that they are absorbing more. And finally, as I said earlier, kids explore the world, usually a lot of times with their mouths, but also with touching and with breathing. And so they might be exposed to some of those sources a lot more, just in the nature of how they're interacting with their environment. So when kids are exposed to lead, there can be a lot of different potential health harms. But before we dive into what those harms are, Alex and I really wanted to make the point that kids are resilient. So when a kid is exposed to lead, they might experience negative or lasting effects, but they can also oftentimes find ways to compensate and to overcome those negative effects. They are adaptable. But obviously, we don't want kids to have to experience those effects. They're already going through so much growing up, so we just don't want to add on more challenges, you know, especially when those challenges are completely preventable, like lead is. So that's why we find it so important to talk about lead and understand the risks and take action to prevent it from harming kids. So we'll dive into the different ways that lead can affect kids now. So lead exposure can cause delayed growth and development. The exact mechanisms of how lead does this is pretty complicated, so I'm not going to go into it today, but essentially, lead can negatively affect a kid's endocrine system, which helps regulate their growth, their development, metabolism, and a lot of other things. In some cases, lead can even delay puberty or get in the way of a kid growing as much as they would normally. All of this altered development can also cause hearing and speech problems. Lead can also cause a number of problems with learning. Again, I'm not going to go into the exact mechanisms of how lead interacts with the brain here, but the way that lead blocks a kid's body from receiving the correct nutrients for their brain and their nervous system, it can lead to learning and behavior problems, decreased ability to pay attention, and lower IQ. So these are all important things for a kid to do well in school. So kids with lead poisoning might not do as well in school. And you'll see the slide says later on, or do well in school later. Since a lot of kiddos under the age of 6, they haven't started school yet, or they're just beginning to, so the effects from lead can extend beyond the time from when they are receiving the high exposure. So one thing to note here before we move on is that there are obviously a lot of factors beyond just lead that can affect a kid's learning. But again, this factor is preventable, so we should do really everything we can to set kids up for success. Lead can affect other bodily systems, which might not be as noticeable until a kid grows up. And the effects on this slide are also what adults can experience with lead exposure. Because even though a lot of prevention and a lot of what you hear is focused on kids, adults can very much experience harm from exposure as well. But because adults are so much bigger, they're fully grown, they aren't going through all of the same rapid development as kids, it takes a higher amount of lead exposure to have harmful effects. But they're definitely there. So the first is with reproductive system. So for pregnant people, being exposed to high levels of lead can actually increase their risk of miscarriage. And lead can also pass to the unborn baby, which can cause a bunch of different things, like the baby being born either too early or too small, or it could cause the child to have learning or behavior problems later on. Also within the reproductive system, people can experience fertility problems with lead exposure. Then with the cardiovascular system, adults can have problems with high blood pressure. So even though lead can affect all of the different systems we just went through, oftentimes a person won't look or act sick. A kid is not going to show really visible signs and symptoms of having lead poisoning. So that's why it's really important to test for lead to know if a kid has been exposed. And you can do this by talking to a doctor about getting a blood lead level test. So a blood test, that's the only way to know if there's lead in a kid's body. And it can be done two different ways. So there can be blood drawn from a vein, or it can just be a finger prick or a heel prick. If the blood is drawn from a prick, and if the results come back as high, there probably will need to be a vein test done, because the drawing blood from the vein is the surest, provides the surest results for blood lead levels. So blood lead level testing is required at 12 and 24 months for kids on Medicaid, not for any other insurance. But one thing to know is that this isn't always followed, so it's still good to ask doctors about testing if your kid is on Medicaid. Coverage through other insurance can vary, so it's really best to just ask, especially if you are concerned that you have some of the common lead sources in or around your home, and Alex is going to go into what those are next. If a child has a high blood lead level, there is probably going to be some follow-up. So for example, you might have folks from the public health come out and help you figure out what are potential sources of lead in your home that are contributing to the child's lead level. All right, so we're going to switch to Alex now, and as we're doing that, I will lay eyes on the chat box. So, oops. Are lead tests mandated for children by Washington State? I think I pretty much answered that. So they're mandated for Medicaid kids, and then Alex will talk a little bit more about refugee children a little bit later on in this. So hold on to that question some more, and we'll talk about testing more.
All right, so we're now going to talk a bit about lead exposure and various sources of lead exposure and ways we can prevent and mitigate that risk. So one thing to note about lead exposure is it's most dangerous when it builds up over time. So it's very cumulative. Doesn't mean that there's no harm from a one-time only exposure, but it means we're way more concerned when someone is in prolonged contact to that source. So this is just a snapshot of a few different examples. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. You don't have to memorize this or anything. We're going to go into these in more detail, but it just gives you an idea of kind of the range of sources for lead exposure. So environmental ones can be lead paint. That's one of the biggest ones, and we'll talk about some of the specifics in the next few slides. But that can manifest in a lot of ways, and paint chips. And if folks are living in an older home and they're doing renovations that have older paint, they may unintentionally kick up a lot of dust that contains lead from that paint. Same with soil. We'll go through that quite a bit, but soil can hold on to lead for quite a bit of time. Water's kind of an odd one, because lead in water normally comes from, rather like the water source, it tends to be the distribution lines or the piping, the household fixtures, that kind of thing. And we actually see lead a lot in various objects. So pottery, especially imported pottery, because a lot of different countries have very different levels of lead regulation. A lot of things with vinyl can contain lead. And then odd ones, like I never thought of this before we were putting this together, but lead shot for like a BB gun, obviously, as the name implies, would have lead. And there's a lot of cosmetics as well, specifically more so for imported cosmetics. And then a lot of different food and drink, and it tends to not be the food or drink itself, but the container it's in. All right, so with preventing exposure, we want to be able to identify the source and then figure out how we can mitigate or sort of combat that source. So as we go through these next few slides, you'll see these two symbols quite a bit. The big red one here will identify a potential source, and that means where lead might be coming from. The big green one here indicates a prevention measure, so something you can do to stop that exposure or to minimize that exposure. And these are the action steps. These are the things we want folks to walk away today, remembering this is how you keep yourself and your family safe. So I mentioned paint a moment ago, and old paint is the most common source of lead exposure in the United States. There was policy that came into play in 1978 that prohibited lead from showing up in paint that goes into homes. But homes that were built before 1978, there's a very good chance that there's lead in that paint there. So if you're not sure how old your dwelling is, I actually didn't know how old my apartment was until we were putting this together, you can go to this website, and this is just built into the slide itself. So we'll send the slides out when we're all done today, so you can follow this link and see how old your dwelling is. But you click on that link, you find this little My Property e-Real Property Search button. It should be kind of the right side of the web page. You'll have a couple of acknowledgments you have to agree to, and then you just enter your address. And I learned that mine was built in 1967. I recently moved, so I'm doing a lot of unpacking and hanging of pictures and mounting things on the wall. So this means that I'm going to have to pay attention and keep some of our strategies in mind as I'm going through that process. So paint dust is a pretty big concern. So a lot of times, the paint that's in an older home, what you see, may not contain any lead, but it's good. There's a good chance that the leaded paint that was there originally, it's just been painted over rather than stripped or removed. And so where this can be a big concern is around window frames, windowsills. So if you ever see this kind of flaking, these chips that can come off, this dust that can form, if your home is older, was built before 1978, then this could be a source of lead exposure. So what we do with this is we clean. Clean house is a healthy house, kind of a silly idiom there, but it does apply. And specifically cleaning for dust that may contain lead, it's important to keep water in mind. So using a damp cloth or a sponge or a wipe or something, that moisture helps keep the lead from going up into the air, and so it kind of keeps it a little more contained. And then following some other protocols like keeping gloves on. If it's a big project and you're doing a big home renovation or something like that, there are other steps you can take too, wearing masks and that kind of thing. So there are tons of products that we don't think about containing lead that actually do have pretty high amounts of lead. One of the most common is keys, and one of our colleagues somebody who used to work with us at the Poison Center had just gotten a new set of keys and decided to test them. And she found that even they were like, I think, a month old, they still had pretty high contents of lead there. There are also stained glass is another really big one. A lot of the solder that holds the glass in place can have lead. Toys can be a big source. So it was more of a concern in the past. There are many more regulations about this right now, but there still have been relatively recent recalls on certain toys. As recent as the early 2000s that could contain lead. Batteries can actually be a big one as well. And while it's a little less common for cell phones to have removable batteries than it once was, it still can occur. And so there is a concern with, especially a kid playing with the phone and popping the battery out, putting it in their mouth. And then the other picture here, these are fishing weights or sinkers. And a lot of times these are leaded, which poses a bit of a concern, not just for individuals who may be going fishing, but if they lose one, falls into a lake or something, they may be unintentionally contaminating that environment. So what do we do to prevent this? Washing hands is key. And I know we're all so saturated with hand washing messaging right now because of COVID-19, but hand washing is one of the best things we can do to prevent ourselves from all sorts of critters, including viruses, including lead. And so this slide is specifically talking about toys. So any toys that kids are playing with, washing those very regularly, as well as washing their hands. And then only allow kids to put clean toys in their mouths. And I know this is so difficult. Kids are, like Megan was saying, kids explore everything with their mouths. And so this can be quite a challenge. But doing our best to make sure that, especially for little kids who are teething, that they only put toys in their mouths that are designed to go in their mouth, like a pacifier or a teething toy or that kind of thing. And just making extra sure you keep those clean. Oh, and I'm seeing, let's see, a comment here. The DOH has a healthy home program. They will check your home if you think you may have lead. That's a great point. We have some DOH resources at the very end of the presentation here, if anyone's curious to learn a little more about that. Thank you so much. All right, so I mentioned soil. Soil can hold on to so much for so long. And it's particularly concerning around highways, airports, any sort of industrial areas that around a factory or something that may have produced lead. This could be a pretty big potential source. And soil or dirt, it sticks to us really easily. It can stick to shoes, stick to clothes, stick to your hands. And so this is a really big one. This is what we call a heat map of Washington lead risk. Here's the link there if anyone wants to check it out. And this site's pretty cool. They show a couple other environmental concerns as well, not just lead, if anyone likes maps and kind of wants to look around there. But the darker red color here, the darker red colors, these indicate a higher risk of lead exposure. So looking at the whole state of Washington, we see kind of a cluster over in the Olympics there. We see kind of a lot throughout central and eastern Washington. For the most part, Western Washington looks pretty minimal risk until you zoom in more. Then you start to see these concentrations throughout South Seattle, throughout Tacoma, Renton and Kent. You got a bit up here in Everett. I know it's a little hard to read the font there. Now, a lot of this comes from there was a smelter, like a big factory in Tacoma that was in operation for years and years and years and years. I believe they shut down in the 1980s, but because they were open for so long, the plume, all the contaminants and pollution that one factory released, it settled into the soil all around this area. And we still see high levels of both lead and arsenic in that soil today. So if folks are curious about that plume, there's some pretty interesting resources you can find online, and we can send those out as well. So this brings us to our prevention step of keeping soil out of the house. And one of the single biggest things we can do is keeping shoes by the door. So rather, I have historically been very guilty of just keeping my shoes on when I come in. That's a habit I need to kick. And then changing clothes. If you're exposed to lead through your work, through your occupation, we're going to go through some occupations that have a higher risk, excuse me, of lead exposure in the next couple slides. And this is a good habit to get into. And I know a lot of folks are having to learn these habits right now. If you're an essential worker throughout COVID, my partner happens to be, and every time she comes home, we've gotten into this routine where she takes her shoes off, takes her clothes off, and hops in the shower before anything else, and getting those clothes clean rather quickly. So these are really good habits to keep in mind if there is a concern for lead exposure as well. So some of these occupational sources, there are tons. This is not a comprehensive list. These are sort of snapshots. I mentioned batteries earlier, so folks who are working within battery reclamation or recycling. Stained glass, we talked about stained glass. Ceramics can be a really big one. Construction workers is a huge one. Construction workers are exposed to so many different materials and substances. And then furniture refinishers. We've got repair workers for older appliances like radiators. We've got folks who are involved with remodeling or refinishing, or if folks are just remodeling or refinishing their home on their own without hiring outside workers. Painting, again, that's a big one. Not even though most new paint is, oh, I just see military also. That is an excellent example. Thank you so much for adding that. But for painting, especially if you're involved with, stripping away old paint that may have lead in it, that right there is another exposure. This one may seem a little obvious, but lead smelters or lead refiners, obviously that is a huge exposure for those workers. And then folks who work in processing plants for plastic, factories for plastic manufacturing. There are all manner of things that end up within plastic, lead being one of them. It can be one of them. All right, so I mentioned imported objects or products a little earlier. So cosmetics can be a really big one, and this is specifically one called Surma, and it's a type of eye makeup. And a lot of Surma, this one in particular, actually, this sample you see in the picture, our predecessor tested it, and it had 22% lead within the Surma itself. And so that's not safe for anyone, kids or adults. And so for anyone who regularly uses this product, it's important to try to find a version that actively is labeled lead-free, and that should be safe to use. So this doesn't mean stop importing objects, stop purchasing objects that are then imported. It just means to take that extra step and make sure that particular object is lead-free. Another potential source is imported spices, imported home remedies, and there's a huge list of all of these. Certain spices, certain remedies, and again, the same rule applies. That the best way to prevent lead exposure from these isn't to stop purchasing internationally. It's just to make sure that these products have gone through some level of testing and to make sure that they are lead free. All right, we're zipping through this a little on the faster side, but that is okay. We have plenty of time for questions, so we're heading toward the end now. Old plumbing, and we talked a little bit about water earlier, and how old plumbing may contain lead. And this is, there's been a lot of messaging about this the past few years from the crisis in Flint, Michigan, and in other parts of the country. And what's a little alarming about this is that a lot of the nation's water infrastructure, so a lot of the pipes themselves that carry water from a source to your home, it's very old. Or a lot of them are very old, I should say, and pipes are not designed to function properly for longer than 50, 75, 100 years, depending on the pipe, depending on how it's built. And so many portions of our water infrastructure are 75, 100, 150 years old even. And so this is an issue that's unfortunately more and more prevalent as this infrastructure continues to age, especially if it is not replaced and maintained. So what do we do to prevent this? One of the best things is to, if you're concerned for your home, is to flush pipes first thing in the morning. So turn your faucets on for a little bit, because that stagnant water that sits overnight, that can hold a higher concentration of lead. Another one is to only use cold water for cooking and drinking. Heat can carry that lead a little further, can have that higher concentration. And then doing sort of mini flushes of the system before you drink water, before you use water to cook. So turning it on for 30 seconds, let it get really cold, and then have a drink of it, or put it in a baby's formula or in a meal or whatever it is you're using it for. So that was kind of an overview of some sources, some mitigation strategies, and we just want folks to consider like that there are so many risk factors involved in this, and it's not just one. So one of the big ones is where's your home located? Are you located near a high traffic area, near an industrial zone? Are you located within those areas with the contaminated soil from the Tacoma plume, the smelter plume? What do you eat and drink, and where you get your food? That can be a huge one. And then do your kids have a habit of putting fingers in your mouth, even if you're not around regular lead exposure? I used the example of keys earlier. We especially when quarantine is not in effect, folks are going in and out of the home all the time, carrying their keys a lot. So if you end up, I don't know, picking your teeth with your finger or something like that, you could be giving yourself an unintentional lead exposure there. So we went through a little bit of cultural factors, different cosmetics, different foods, different spices. So making sure to only purchase lead-free products is really key there. Smoking puts you at risk for all manner of things, and you wouldn't think about lead exposure being one of them, but it is. And it's not just an individual smoker. It could be folks experiencing secondhand smoke as well. There can be a lead content within cigarettes. And in healthy housing, we talked a little bit about that, not just where your home is located, but how old it is, what are the components that went into it, how is it built, how is it maintained, and then how often you clean, and in what manner you clean. Having cleaning regularly is a much better prevention approach if lead is a concern, because it keeps that dust from building up too much. Seeing a doctor regularly, this is huge for so many things. But I don't think we often tie seeing a doctor to lead prevention, but with that testing, it absolutely is. It's very, very key. There's a genetic component. There's a genetic component to how our bodies process outside material, lead being one of them. And then stress. Again, a lot of folks don't always think about this, but stress can impede our body's ability to do anything. It can interfere with all manner of processes, including how we break down how we process lead. And I think it's important to remember there's certainly an equity factor here as well. A lot of these seem like choices. Well, just choose to live somewhere else, choose to build your house this way. And those choices really aren't all that accessible to everyone. Someone may be living in a certain area because that's what they can afford right now, because that's where they have to be. So I think it's important to keep that in mind just throughout all of this. So some other considerations, I think Megan mentioned this earlier about refugees. So refugees, new refugees especially, are often at greater risk for lead exposure. This is for a few reasons. It could be that they had overseas exposure, so wherever they're coming from, they may have had exposures. And they also have to now adapt to new exposures in the US that they may not have been familiar with before. There may not have been this habit of having to take your shoes off when you come in, having to change clothes instantly when you come in. And if someone is recently placed in housing, say within South Seattle, they may have to learn these new prevention strategies. And so because of this, the CDC recommends that for all kids aged 6 months to 16 years, all refugee kids who come to the US get an immediate blood lead level test. And regardless of the results of that test, to do a follow-up blood lead level test on all refugee kids aged 6 months to 6 years. And that would be 3 to 6 months after housing has been established. And that follow-up is also really key because of that new exposures. Or the potential for new exposures. And so say, again, someone's placed within South Seattle, within that Tacoma smelter plume range. If they aren't aware that, oh, I have to pay attention to the soil and make sure I don't bring soil into the home, then this follow-up test would help them, help put it on their radar, and it would help catch any sort of exposure early on. Now there are a ton more. There's some great guidelines for the through the CDC, and that's a great point. That all kids should be tested, and it should be part of a yearly physical. Someone just posted that there. Absolutely. And I'm going to go into a little bit of data, not a ton, just a couple slides on these next slides here. So Washington, I think, I'm biased. I've lived in Washington all my life. I think we do a lot of things really, 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 really well. And lead testing, unfortunately, is not one of them. So this is from 2012 to 2016. This looks at all kids under the age of 6 or 72 months of age who are tested. So the blue bar there, that's the United States. The red bar is Washington. And these are proportions, these are percentages. And there's not been a single year where Washington has caught up to the US average. And so that is definitely something as a state we can work on far, far better. And so folks ask us a lot, what is the Poison Center here about? And so most folks who call us with lead questions, it's about ingestion of some sort of foreign body, foreign object that might have lead. And so it could be those fish weights, those sinkers there. It could be bullets. We had a call not that long ago about a kid who ate a bullet or swallowed a bullet, BBs and that kind of thing. We also get calls from healthcare facilities about treatment options and treatment strategies for patients who may have elevated lead levels. And that could be kids, that could be adults. And then we also will get calls about occupational exposures. And then a lot of what the Poison Center will do, what the Spies will do, is help recommend different resources to help folks identify the potential sources of lead exposure. All right, folks, we're very, very, very nearly done. Just a couple resources to look through here. So one of the best ones would be your healthcare provider, because again, they can get that test going right away. The Poison Center, we've got your back. We are here for you, so you can check us out at our website there. And once more, there is the phone number. Your local health jurisdiction. And I'm in Seattle right now, so my local health jurisdiction would be Public Health Seattle King County. They've got some really excellent information, infographics, and resources on their website, hyperlinked there. Same with the Department of Health. The Washington State Department of Health has a ton. And we mentioned Medicaid a little bit, so we wanted to put resources for Medicaid. So Washington Health Plan Finder, this is how folks can get themselves signed up. And then the Healthcare Authority's website there has some additional information, as well as if folks don't want to go through the process of signing themselves up, you can connect with a navigator who can help you with that. And we also included a link here for a local water testing lab, so they can go and test water supply and see if there's any sort of contamination there. I really, really like this little clip here, this little image here. This is from Public Health Seattle King County, and this link goes to the full infographic that this is a part of. And it's just this very simple, straightforward checkbox, just a little checklist. And if you can check any of these boxes for your kid, then the recommendation is to just go get that blood test. And it has some other information in the infographic as well. It's a very well done one. All right, so a little update here. I don't know if anyone has heard of the lead shop. So this is lead shops. We were able to do this last year. It was a big compilation of different agencies. So the Poison Center, Public Health Seattle King County, Healthcare Alliance, Hazardous Waste, TILF, and Within Reach, and a few others I haven't listed here actually. We all came together and we were able to do a lot of lead education throughout 2019. So unfortunately, a lot of the 2020 ones have been quite disrupted because of COVID-19, because we don't want a bunch of folks gathering all at once right now. So keep this on your radar. We are hoping that we'll be able to host some of these toward the end of the year and into next year. And we'll be able to post these on our website, and we'll try to announce them on our Facebook and that kind of thing. And feel free to email us directly if you'd like to be notified of upcoming lead shops or similar events like that, and we can add you to our list. Once more, here is the Poison Center number. Please add that to your phone if you've not already. And big thank you all for attending today. Here are this is our contact information. It's best to send us an email right now since it's a little difficult to get into the office, so it's harder to check our direct line. But please, are there any questions? We can try to answer them to the best of our ability. All right, well, I'm not seeing any right now. Oh, here we go. Oh my gosh, well, you're very welcome. I'm sorry to hear that that's been happening with your daughter. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions now. Please jot down our email addresses there. If you think of anything, later today even, just send us a message. We'll do our best to answer that. But I'm gonna go ahead and sign out today. Thank you all so much. Oh, I just saw this question here. I'm assuming that filtration systems help filter out water when talking about lead, right? That's a good question. I don't know enough about filtration systems to answer that very well, so I'm going to jot that down. I'll speak to our one of our spies and our medical director. Oh, no, they do not. Thank you, Raquel. That's a good point. Awesome.